Okay, welcome to the final chapter. So in this chapter I'm just going to continue and I'm just playing around basically with my render scene. I rotated my crate around because I like to have like the text of the front at the front. And I'm just going into my sky and I just like make my sky a little bit darker. And I'm just, in general, I'm trying to like find an interesting looking scene. Now I wanted to maybe go for like something like this where you can like rotate it around, but it just didn't look really right. It works for some models, it doesn't work for all models. In this case, I didn't really like it. So what I ended up doing is just scrapping that plan. And let's see, so I'm playing around a bit with my son. At this point, I'm starting to forget exactly what I did because I'm doing so many things in like a short time. So yeah, I'm just trying to get like a bit more of like a drastic sun over here, just to get something that looks a little bit more interesting. I'm trying to add another light at the back, and I went for like Omni light, but this ended up not looking very good. I will actually revisit that later on, but for now I just didn't really like the look. Now in my camera, I'm playing around with my strength, I'm playing around with my contrast, and there's also this very nice tool, which is the curves tool, which is in your color, and this allows you to do like a little bit more specific changes to your contrast and everything. Now at this point, if we go ahead and go into Substance Painter, let's see, what am I going to do here? Oh yeah, I'm changing the tiling of my woods because I felt like that the tiling wasn't, like it felt a little bit low resolution. So I just went ahead and I just changed the tiling a little bit. And I'm just doing some general balancing. So I'm playing around with my white spots and like the darkening to get a little bit more of like an intense look on them. And now in general, also with my dark spots, I'm just playing around with like adding some directionality to them over here. And I'm doing that simply with a black mask. And then I'm using Grunge Map and I'm setting my projection to triplanar projection. Triplanar projection in your UVs, it basically means that it will ignore your UV maps and it will just map it as if it is projected on it. And I did this just to get like, again, like a bit of like a stronger effect. Now, I'm also going to add and add like some ground dirt, which is just a smart mask, to add like a little bit of like white dirt at the bottom. And something that is also cool that we'll do later on is we will go ahead and like also add some fading on our wood. For now, I'm just balancing out my actual paint on like the color of the paint on my metal, and I just keep looking back at Marmoset. Normally, I just have Marmoset over on my second screen so that I can look. But of course for this tutorial you will just see me switching back and forth. And yeah, so just in general it's small changes, playing around with the dirt, and I'm just trying to get it a little bit more closer to my reference basically. And that's what you will see me like working on with this. Also, over here what I'm going to do is I'm just adding like a little bit more of like this norm map detail with like the sawing on the sides. I felt like that might look quite nice. I am also adding this later on to the sides of my planks that you will see on like my front plank, but I actually didn't like that, so I will remove it again. But that's just something like a lot of this stuff is just playing around with it, honestly. Like you have a general direction that you know what to do, but for the rest you are just playing around with stuff until you get closer to your actual reference basically. And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to like get close to my reference. See? So that already like makes a nice change. So we are slowly getting there, just getting something interesting. And that's what I'm mostly focusing on right now. Now, also one thing that I need to keep in mind is that I'm working in 1080p on my screen right now, but I'm used to working in 4K, and this looks much better in 4K. So if I would switch back to 4K, everything looks a lot sharper. So that is just like generally something that I need to keep in mind, because my final images will be in 4K, so those will actually be nice and sharp. Over here what I'm doing is I'm just removing basically the white dirt that we have from my edges, because it was a little bit too intense. And I did this just by simply adding a folder with a mask with an edge generator on like our smart masks, and just to basically mask out those edges. So that will just like improve it a little bit. For the rest, I'm just playing around generally. Like I'm playing around a little bit more with my depth of field, which we will be using later on. For now, I didn't really like what it was doing, so I am getting rid of that. And now I'm going to work more on my render. I went into Maya and I just export a simple plane. It's literally just a plane. It doesn't need anything. It's just so that we have like a white background basically, as you can see over here. And I felt like that might make things look a little bit more interesting if we have like a shiny white background and we just make it like a typical model presentation. And this will also work with our depth of field. So over here I'm just playing around with, in general, just like my camera angles that I wanted to take. I'm also going to go ahead and I'm just going to play around with my depth of field to not make it as intense. And you can just do that on your camera, just play around with your depth of field and your settings over here. You can also of course scale your plane how much you want it. I'm adding a unique material to my plane and playing around with the base color and the roughness to get a slightly darker plane, but still have like a little bit of like that roughness look. So it is up to you, like what you want to go for. I went for a very, very slightly bluish looking color, still quite bright, and then quite a bit of roughness in there. Now I'm also making my text a little bit more intense because I felt like it was hard to see. And now I'm also just going with my sky, because now that I decided to go with like a white plane, I end up setting my sky color also to white in order to kind of like make it feel like it's an infinite area, like it just keeps going and going and going. So that's what I'm doing here basically. There are many other ways that you can do this, also just with models, but this is like the technique that I end up using. And it's just because I'm still playing around with it. Yeah, you can still, even now, you can still see me like messing around with my sky or with my sun just to get like something a bit interesting. Now, if you go to your area and shape in your light and set the diameter higher, you get softer shadows. That's basically what for the sun, what you would want to use that for. For the rest, I'm just once again playing around with like my saturation, my bloom. All of these settings are already covered, and I will also cover them in the real-time chapter for our material. It's just basically me just keep messing around with settings until I get something I like. Because at this point, I still do not know how I actually want my render to look like. Because, yeah, I like to make every prop unique. So, but this one I couldn't spend an hour just on rendering, of course. So I just want to get something that looked good, but that was quickly to make. Because I wanted to focus to be just on like creating the actual asset, and the final renders is like just a little bit of an extra, because of course I do want to create like a nice looking image. Now what I'm going to probably work on is, oh wait, here you can see what I did with the sawing normal, but I actually end up not liking that, so I actually removed it later on also, because it just felt way too strong. And yeah, just in general I didn't like it. But I am going to now go into my rust, and I'm just adding like increasing my normal map bumps on my rust in order to make those a little bit stronger, so that you can actually see that the rust is eating away inside of our metal over here. Now what I'm also going to do is I'm just adding a quick fill layer that is just dark. It's just a dark color and with a lower opacity, and I add a mask to that, and I basically just select my over here my screws for this, just to make them a little bit darker, to hopefully make them stand out a little bit. And I only really need to do that where there is no rust, because else the rust is kind of like covering this effect already. So I'm just doing this wherever there is no rust. I just add this, just to add like a little bit of darkening, just to see if that maybe improves things a little bit. Because right now I felt like they were not as strong as I wanted them to be. Now, of course, you could literally make them a different color. You could just make them a metallic color if you wanted. But I wanted to follow my reference, and in my reference, they just painted over them. Which makes sense. Like, once you've done this, you can just as well paint over it and everything. It doesn't really matter too much. But who knows, if you already had the metal painted before you applied it to the crate, then yes, that kind of stuff you can work with. I'm just sometimes in my rust, I'm just working on the sharpening. Also, what I have over here is that our white dirt and everything, it is really, really strong. So that's something that we'll also work on. And I think right now, yes, washout. Okay, this is a cool chapter. So I'm going to add a washout color. A washout color will basically break up the very even wood that we have. So I'm going to go for surface worn. And as you can see, what we can do with this is if we give this a plain color, it will just kind of like hide all those graininess behind it. And this will actually divide up your model really nicely. So this was actually a really big effect. Here you can see like the effect. If we also play around with like our roughness, so it's almost like a plain color, but it's just like a very soft color, which will make sure that you don't just have like the classic wood, which is just like grains non-stop, because that kind of stuff, it doesn't look always very interesting on old wood. But doing something like this, as you can see here, that already adds like quite a bit to it, and it will just make everything look a lot more interesting. We still need to do some balancing. For example, now also our metal color doesn't really match anymore, so we just want to play around with that. So yeah, for the rest, at this point, it's just general stuff, adding some small details. You will see me like working on that later on. I'm adding a second sunlight, and this is because I wanted to just try and get like some reflections coming from the back. And that's what you see me doing over here. So the second sunlight, I call it a rim light. It will once again be in like my real-time tutorial. And there you can see me like really just focusing on this. Also, by the way, if you want to have like a much more in-depth look in all of this stuff, we do have a paid course, which is called Creating a Hero Asset for Games. And that course will go in real time over every single thing that I do here, plus much more. And yeah, it will just in general be a lot better to understand compared to this. This type of tutorial, I would think, is really good to understand if you already have like experience with texturing and everything and you just want to polish up your skills. But for absolute beginners, yeah, you can't always follow along with such a strong time lapse, I would say. So yeah, over here I'm just basically working a little bit more with the highlights. I just keep looking. I take my time to really look at my model and just look at my reference to see if I can see something interesting. Now over here, what I, for example, saw is I saw that there is some extra darkening going on the edges. So I'm just adding a paint layer to my darkening. And I'm just adding like some darkening to my edges over here. Now I actually end up duplicating this because I had to move it into a different position. And just adding this darkening on like the edges, it will give you a little bit of like a gradient effect here. So you can just see me like playing around getting the right brush. So it will give like a little bit of like a gradient effect, which once again, it will just add to the character of your wood. And I'm only doing this on like the very large shapes, as you can see over here. And the smaller ones, they don't really need this. This is just like a very large overall shape. And it's going to be subtle. It will be quite subtle. So I do not want to interrupt the dirt. So I'm placing it below my dirt. But I'm placing it above my washout. Just to get like a little bit of that extra darkening in there. So we're getting close. So now, yeah, it's pretty much going to be back and forth with the balancing. Over here we can see that the white looked really strange. So I'm just painting that out by adding a paint layer on top. And I also need to do that with my dirt. I don't know why. It's probably with the ambient occlusion that for some reason the ambient occlusion is really strong in those areas, causing this effect. So I'm just going to do some manual work, paint those pieces out a little bit, and that will then also look a lot better. Here you can see. So we're starting to get there. We are starting to get there. I just keep playing around with my scene to get something that I like and that is presentable, of course. And for the rest, I'm just like having a quick look. Now at this point, because I have a really bad short-term memory, I'm not sure because there were so many things that I did. So it looks like that I'm just playing around with my white bits. That's always the thing with at the end. I personally am an artist that just jumps back and forth 50, 60 times and just keeps doing that and just does like small adjustments. Over here, I felt like the wood was feeling very plain. So I just added in a little bit more of that white back, which I reduced just to get a little bit more of that character out of the wood to make it look a bit more interesting. I keep looking at my reference to see if there's anything interesting. Over here, I just play around a little bit more with my darkening, but it looks like that here in my screws you can see them. They are highlighting, so that's quite nice. Now another thing that I need to work on is I need to... Oh wait, I'm adding a fill layer. So what I'm doing here, I don't often do this, is I add a fill layer. And this fill layer will only have a color, and this color will be set to overlay. This is basically to add an overall color to your scene in case you, for example, made your entire model a little bit too green, which I did in my case. I can just add, for example, like another color all the way on top and set it to overlay. And this will just do like some very quick general color balancing. The reason I wouldn't go in is because else I would need to change all of my colors that I've set, which by now are like 10 different layers, just to make everything a little bit less green, and then I need to keep playing around with that. While over here, if I go ahead and set this to overlay, and I went for like a little bit of like a red color, and I just set the opacity very low, it will just do some very soft balancing. Now for the rest, these top bits also had some problems with like our white and our dirt, so I'm just once again painting that stuff out. As you can see over here, just to make that look a bit better. And I think at this point that we are going to just do another export. I don't think there's much going on over here, so I can just export this. Here, see? Now it's starting to get a lot more character because of all the dirt that is on here. So that's starting to look quite nice. Sorry for like the graininess, this is because we have ray tracing on, so whenever I move my scene, it will showcase that. And for the rest, what I'm going to do now is I'm just probably going to work mostly on like my render scene. Once again, I just have a quick look at my skies, just to make sure if there is not a better sky that I can find. Of course, because this is wood and it is very dull, the sky will not have too much of an effect on our actual model, but it will have an effect on the actual plane below it, and that's why I want to revisit my sky to make sure that just everything is looking the way I want it to look. Now once that's done, I'm just doing some very small balancing with my lighting. Later on I'm also just going to do a little bit of scene building, which is just me duplicating around my crate. And I'm just also, in general, just playing around with every setting that I've just covered, like my depth of field and my sharpening, setting it a little bit sharper, stuff like that. Saving my scene. And at this point I just lock my camera, I just go into my main camera, and I basically start just playing around with seeing if I can like make my scene look a bit more interesting. Now first of all I try to do this, have like the classic crate on top of crate, but that just doesn't look good. So I quickly scrapped that idea and I just went ahead and went for something that looks a little bit more, that looks better, a bit more interesting. So over here I'm just trying to like place some crates around, maybe duplicate some crates on top of each other, and this did seem to look a lot better. So just give them like a little bit of a rotation just to give them some variation. And here, so this does look like a little bit better if we do something like this. So that's generally it. At this point we are basically in closing chapters. The texture is pretty much done. I'm just finalizing my scene to get like a bit more of an interesting render. But in total that was pretty much it for this tutorial course. The rest what you will see me doing is just some basic balancing. So this tutorial course, as I said before, this is one of the first times that I'm doing a time-lapse course, just to save some time for everyone. And also because YouTube doesn't really like 10-hour long tutorials. So I do hope that you enjoyed it, and I hope that you learned a lot from it. Now if you want to have much more in-depth courses, I would recommend that you have a look into the description and look at our full courses. Our full courses are all in real time. They span anywhere from 5 to 25 hours. So there's a lot of content there and everything that you will need to know to learn how to become an environment artist or a material artist or a prop artist in general.